In the modern day AFL, where everything is observed and studied under what seems to be microscopes, scandals and controversies are inevitable. Whether it be specific players or teams as a whole, scandals have been prevalent within the league's history, especially in more recent times. Every team has gotten into trouble one way or another, and that got me thinking, what is every team's worst scandal? So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down each AFL side's worst scandal in their club's history, and briefly run through how it all went down. Just a little disclaimer, themes like drug use, racism, etc. will be discussed, so if you're someone who becomes uneasy around these topics, please click off now. And also, I'm just reporting on what is publicly known or speculated, not trying to accuse specific people of actions they may or may not have done. Not trying to demonise anyone mentioned in this video at all. With that out of the way, remember to subscribe if you want, as only 9% of you guys are actually subscribed, and it really helps me and my content out. Appreciate it if you do. Like the video if you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get into it. One of the more recent examples of a scandal to kick us off, the Adelaide Crows' biggest scandal was of course the 2018 pre-season camp. Run by Collective Minds, a consultancy group based in Queensland, the 2018 Crows list had to endure a number of reportedly strange and mentally taxing exercises, including being tied up to trees, having abuse hurled at them, staring at each other until Tom Lynch supposedly vomited, and using a racially inappropriate digging stick to divulge each other's weaknesses. This was straight after the Crows' 2017 grand final loss to Richmond, so that was the move that the club used to push these players to their limits. The aftermath of this camp was apparent immediately, as several members of the playing group and coaching staff left or were asked to leave the organisation. The Crows have only really just recovered from this event and are now looking like a promising young team this season. In the 2001 grand final against Essendon, the Brisbane Lions were accused of using IV drips to rehydrate players quickly through the means of injections. Some say this powered them during the 2001 season and eventually led to them winning the grand final. And after this information emerged to the public, the AFL banned IV drips within 24 hours of games, and then in 2013 banned all use of needles. There were also claims from Premiership player Ash McGrath's cousin Jason that he supplied a number of drugs to the players, as well as match fixing and gambling. This is not confirmed to be true currently. The most relevant of Carlton's scandals is the salary cap breaches of the late 90s and early thousands. This was a major scandal at the time and resulted in the club being fined over $1 million. The breaches were in the form of under-the-table payments to 4 players: Craig Bradley, Stephen Silvani, Stephen O'Reilly and Fraser Brown. The club was also stripped of several early draft picks in the 2002 and 3 AFL drafts, specifically draft picks number 1 and 2, all their draft picks in the 2003 preseason draft, and the first and second round draft picks in the 2003 national draft. The aftermath of this scandal left the club in disarray for the next 5 years, as the penalties obviously didn't ease the struggling nature of the Blues at the time. Collingwood have a number of noteworthy scandals or incidents, but in my opinion this is the worst. Former Collingwood president and media personality Eddie Maguire has had a number of controversial moments over the years, but none top his comments made on Triple M Radio in 2013. He was noted comparing Adam Goodes, one of the all-time great players and one of Aboriginal heritage, to King Kong, the fictional ape. Obviously this is a horrendous act, and something that was looked down upon by the AFL community as a whole. He didn't step down from the position until years later, and his actions took part in fueling an ongoing saga between certain fans and Adam Goodes, which eventually forced him into retirement. One of the more obvious examples on this list, the Essendon doping saga of the early 2010s, was a massive deal in the AFL community for many reasons. At the end of this eventual court case, it was found that 34 players were found to have used illegal supplements. Essendon was fined $2 million, James Hird was suspended as coach, and Joe Watson lost his Brownlow due to it. I'm sure that nearly everyone watching this video is familiar with the situation, and it's a bit played out at this point, so I will move on. In 2018, at a Fremantle club event, the head coach at the time, Ross Lyon, was accused of acting inappropriately towards a female employee. A second separate complaint was also referred to the AFL's integrity unit. The club came under pressure from major sponsors to action, and the club issued an apology to the former employee for stress caused during the whole ordeal. In the end, Ross continued to coach for another year until eventually being sacked, not due to the controversy, but because of Freo missing the finals for 4 consecutive seasons. He now, of course, coaches the Saints. This next story is a bit disturbing, so I ask any of you who may feel nauseous or upset to skip this part of the video, probably about 30 seconds or so. In the year 2000, on February 16th, Gary Ablett Sr. was partying with Alicia Horan, a major footy fan, and eventually after a long night consuming a various amount of illicit drugs and substances, she found herself in Ablett's hotel room in the Park Hyatt in Melbourne. She was caught up in the drug culture and partying of one of her idols, and this led her to overdose that same night and unfortunately pass away. Ablett was fined $1,500 for possession of illicit drugs and states that he has truly never escaped the pain of what he let happen that night. In 2015, a cocaine ring was identified within the Gold Coast Footy Club, with players Carmichael Hunt and Harley Bennell being at the forefront of these investigations. It was noted by the ACC that information received suggested that illicit drug use by professional athletes was prevalent within the group. Other specific players were not added during the investigations, and this issue was supposedly solved internally within the club. The youngest club in the comp, GWS's Scandal, isn't really so much as an incident, but it's worth a mention anyway. One of the more recent events on this list, in a 2021 elimination final against Sydney, star forward Toby Green bumped to umpire Matt Stevic while walking from the ground at quarter time, due to a disagreement of an on-field decision. Obviously the AFL isn't taking too kindly to aggressive physical action taken towards an umpire, and issued him an initial 3-match ban that was raised to 6 upon review. Toby Green is no stranger to controversial incidents, but this will probably top the list in the pushback he received from the AFL as an organisation. A very successful club throughout the 2010s, the Hawthorn Football Club was led by a number of superstars, including Cyril Rioli. He shockingly retired in 2018 at a younger age of 28. After his retirement, him and his wife, Shannon Arsam Rioli, broke their silence on racism and cultural neglect within the club's borders. Rioli cites an incident at Launceston Airport where club president at the time, Jeff Kennett, commented on Shannon's ripped jeans, offering loose change to help, quote, sew them up. This was the last straw for Cyril and saw him go into retirement, but he also noted many other incidents over his years at the club which were racist in nature. Since this point, there have been many more investigations into the culture of the club at the time, with Chris Fagan and Alistair Clarkson stepping back to focus on these investigations just recently. The scandal as a whole has ruined the image of a truly dominant and unstoppable team for some AFL fans. In 2009, Melbourne were accused of tanking towards the end of the season to receive a better pick in the upcoming draft. This is against the AFL's rules, unlike leagues such as the NBA, and therefore an investigation was launched. The investigation took place in 2012, due to comments made by former player Brock McLean, stating that he was dissatisfied with the club's match strategies during his time there. The club was not found guilty, but senior coach Dean Bailey and general manager of football operations Chris Connolly were found guilty of related charges. When he was fired in 2011, Dean Bailey was quoted as saying, "I had no hesitation at all in the first 2 years of ensuring this club was well placed for draft picks. I think what I've done is the right thing by the club, and if it costs me my job, so be it. But the club is always bigger than the individual. I was asked to do the best thing by the Melbourne Football Club, and I did it. I put players in different positions to enable them to develop. I think the whole football club agreed that we wanted to develop our players, so we did." This statement was also seen as suspicious by investigators at the time. One of the biggest examples on this list, Wayne Carey's affair with teammate Anthony Stevens' wife Kelly, led to the implosion of the North Melbourne Footy Club. Carey was an all-time great player at the club, making 7 All-Australian appearances and winning 2 premierships with the Roos. But this off-field scandal became equally associated with Duck, as he apparently left the club without ever apologising to Stevens. And to this day, Stevens maintains that he never heard an apology from Carey. The Roos obviously lost their best player and therefore any chance of reaching the promised land anytime soon. And fast forward 20 odd years, North have never been back to a grand final since. One of the more avoidable scandals, and probably the most famous, Carey's actions led to the downfall of a top-tier organisation at the time, and forever soiled his legacy as an all-time great player. There isn't really a huge scandal in Port's history that I could think of or research, so I'm just going to mention a few small incidents and then move on. Good with you guys? Good. Sam Palpepper was accused of inappropriately making contact with a female on a drunken night out in 2018. Also, during the peak of COVID, Victorian players' families were allowed to visit them in SA, against government regulations at the time. And of course, who could forget the ongoing saga of the prison bars between them and Collingwood. There are a couple of smaller incidents to mention for the Tigers. 2 Richmond players, Callum Coleman-Jones and Sydney Stack, were involved in a street fight and COVID hub breach in 2020, but were later found not guilty of starting the altercation. Nathan Broad shared inappropriate images of a woman wearing his 2017 premiership medal without her consent. He was subsequently suspended the first 3 games of the 2018 season and publicly apologised. Labelled Chopstickgate, superstar Dustin Martin threatened to stab a woman with chopsticks in 2015, though it was later revealed he was cleared of any major threats made. Despite these controversies, throughout this time Richmond maintained a premiership calibre level of play and won 3 premierships. Kim Duthie was just a 17-year-old schoolgirl when Ricky Nixon, one of the most high-profile sports agents at the time, had an inappropriate relationship with her. Nixon also played 51 games for the Saints and was an agent to players such as Gary Ablett Jr., Wayne Carey, Ben Cousins, Jason Dunstall, Tony Lockett, Nick Riewoldt and Tom Hawkins. She also released several inappropriate images of both Nixon and other Saints players, including Nick Riewoldt and Nick Del Santo. She also claimed that one of the players had gotten her pregnant, but this was later thrown out, and she admitted that the players pictured were not involved. She stated she exposed the players because they, quote, treated her with disrespect. One of the biggest suspensions served in the modern game, Barry Hall got 7 weeks for knocking West Coast player Brent Staker out cold with an off-the-ball punch. It was labelled as one of the dirtiest acts in footy history, and with this being a more modern example of in-game violence, there was of course a close-up camera angle, leading to the video being spread far and wide. I know I've watched it probably at least 50 times throughout my life. Hall has admitted wrongdoing, has deeply apologised many times to Staker, and has shown major regret, stating he hopes his kids never watch that video. Good to see a turnaround from Baz, but back in the day, he was definitely a force to be reckoned with. The obvious answer for West Coast is Ben Cousins, and the drama surrounding most of his time at the club, but I also wanted to talk about Andrew Gaff, so I'll do both. Cousins was a drug addict, plain and simple. Most footy fans know the extent of his off-field behaviour as one filled with controversy. There are too many incidents to name, but Cousins was known for his on-field performances as much as he was for his off-field antics. It was also noted he was a star player, being a Brownlow medalist and a premiership player. His career went downhill from there, and in retirement he has seen more charges. It does seem as though he's slowly getting better, wishing the best for an all-time great. Andrew Gaff is noted as a mild-mannered player, so it was a shock when he punched Dockers' young gun Andy Brayshaw in the mouth in 2018, breaking his jaw and dislodging several teeth. Gaff was suspended and eventually missed out on the Eagles' eventual premiership win, showing the karma in this situation was all too real. And finally, Adam Neal at 13 years old was abused by Footscray fundraising chairman and steward of the under-19s Graham Hobbs. Hobbs was jailed for 15 months and eventually died in 2009. The Bulldogs were accused of not doing enough or putting protective measures in place to help prevent these actions. The club now faces up to millions of dollars in fines, showing the great impact of the scandal years later. Well, that wraps up every AFL team's biggest scandal. Did I miss any? Let me know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like if you enjoyed and subscribe for future sports-filled content. Have a good one and cheers.